I am here to answer why do Asians succeed in America. Um, I want to talk briefly about the shared prejudice and discrimination that Asians have had with other ethnic groups like blacks and Latinos, and then go into the reasons why Asians pulled ahead out of all the minority groups. Pulled so far ahead, in fact, that in many domains, even more so than whites, have done better than whites. Um, First, America has had a racist past, of course, as we know, and Asians were no exception. In the 1800s, Asians were relegated to the most awful jobs. We couldn't have the normal paying jobs. For example, the name coolie in Chinese means someone who suffers. So the Chinese working on the railroads, for example, in America at the time, were called coolie because they suffered. That's how bad it was. And how much did they suffer? Well, the saying, not a Chinaman's chance is from a description of how dangerous it was for Chinese railroad workers, is that it frequently resulted in fatalities. Um, then we were banned. We were banned from from immigration. So the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act is the only official anti-ethnic group for immigration in our entire history of the United States. That's how much America disliked Asians, particularly Chinese, but it spilled over into other Asians as well. Um, Chinese and largely other Asians were considered subhuman for during the late 1800s onwards, and that's because the once great empire of China, which was top dog for thousands of years, started to decline around that time, and everyone was picking on it. Um, the entire world was trying to make a grab at the wealth of China, and it fell apart also because of its own hubris. That's another topic, but I would definitely put a lot of the blame on China itself. Anyway, we then fast forward, we came here largely in the 1960s when the immigration ban was lifted and communism was threatening to take over the entire world. So the U.S. adopted the refugees, the Asian refugees from these countries, because every refugee you take in is one you don't have to fight. Um, and not only that, but there was a large brain drain. They call it the big Asian brain drain, where a lot of smart professionals from Asian countries, particularly China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and to some degree the Southeast Asian countries as well. They came here and America benefited because now they have all the high skilled workers that came from Asia. We were part of the civil rights movement as well. No doubt, all the minorities rallied together to and of course blacks led the charge and did most of the heavy lifting, most involved in that. But all of us were involved, or I'm not, but Asians back then were involved in the protests and in the Jim Crow reforms. So, needless to say, we sort of started at the same point as everyone else, as all the other oppressed minorities in the 60s. So how is it that we are at vastly different points fast forward 60 years later? And doesn't that undermine the narrative that black people are too oppressed to rise up? Well, of course it does, and I'll explain why. The reasons why Asians have done well is, simply put, Asians work really hard. It is in the Asian culture, in all Asian cultures, to work hard and to have stable families and to prioritize education. Some Asian groups prioritize those more than others. Particularly East Asians prioritize education more than Southeast Asians, but all of them prioritize it more than most Americans. So, for example, in one census I found, Asian K through 12 students study 2 extra hours more than the average American on a daily basis, and that's a lot. That's definitely more than enough to get ahead. And that's exactly what we see, especially in California, which has a large Asian population. We see that Asians make up a large part of the elite universities in California, particularly the University of California's, the UCs, way more than our actual population percentage. Some of the UCs have, in fact, majority Asian, like Berkeley, LA, Irvine, more than whites even. So what does that tell you? So we study more, and then the next thing is we choose more lucrative majors. Asians focus on STEM majors, and other groups focus on like less lucrative majors. I think blacks had the most concentration for any demographic in education. Now, this isn't to knock other majors, but it is clear that some majors are more lucrative than others, with STEM being an average at the top. And you could go into philosophically why that is. I think it's pretty obvious that STEM majors are the most important because they address issues which directly affect our daily life. You know, a bioengineer or researcher solving cancer, okay, or right now, of course, bioresearchers working on COVID vaccine. That is far more pressing and far more in demand than any liberal arts major can give. Now, again, we need all these things in a flourishing society, but some things are more pressing, and the more pressing things are more lucrative. And this major choice is already a delineation of that. Now we get into other things about college. SAT scores, resemble the study habits. So in a study that was done by UC Berkeley professors who actually are more on the leftist side, they're in favor of black politics. They found that with the same accounting for the same socioeconomic level, Asians still do better on the SATs than other minority groups. And you wonder, how is that so? Especially since they recently got rid of the SATs because they said it was discriminatory towards blacks and Latinos. How can a test that is mostly about English and Asians speak, their Asian languages at home and their parents are unable to help them with English, Asian languages being the furthest from English possible, how is it that Asians do the best on it? That doesn't make any sense if it's discriminatory. All right, I don't know about you, but take any average Westerner and have them read Chinese, Korean, or Japanese. They wouldn't understand a word. That's how different they are. And to say that it favors us and discriminates against native English speakers like blacks, that's ridiculous. All right, so within the education sphere, we already see a very big disparity in things, but it gets more broad than that. Spending habits. All right, Asians are known to be frugal. It's true. All right, my dad, who came here with nothing but did do well in tech, he still wears the same tidy whities from decades ago, and they're pretty much in tatters right now. All right. I believe comedian Jimmy O Yang joked about that, and yeah, I can relate. I'm not that stingy, but I definitely do value how hard it is to get money, and you don't waste it. So spending habits is already a big disparity. With I think if you look at like how the black community spends their money, they spend more of the percentage of their income on luxury goods, beauty products, expensive cars than any other ethnic group, and of course especially Asians, who I just said are very frugal. So when you spend your money on luxury goods, not only are you, using your current money, but that is also an opportunity cost for your future, and that compounds. So let's say you spend 10% of your income on, luxury, things you don't need. That's 10% now, but if that 10% was invested into stocks or assets, it grows. And by 10 years or so, that 10% has become 50%. And so you can see in a lifetime how a small amount, what seems like a small amount in 1 year, can keep growing until it's really big in 20 years. And then, of course, there are opportunity costs which you can't measure. Like if you spent that amount on further education, and that further education got you a better job, these are things that are really hard to quantify, but they're very real. They're very real, and they definitely are part of the disparity between these minority groups. And then other statistics, right, that are very relevant. Teen pregnancy rate, right? Teen pregnancy rate is the lowest in Asians. We are, in general, a very sex taboo culture, and it's a plus and a minus. The minus, of course, is that Asians are not too supportive of LGBTQ rights, but the plus is that there is very good family stability. Even within Asian groups, it varies, with East Asians being even more prudish than Southeast Asians generally on sex topics and premarital sex, teen pregnancy. But in this day and age, it is incredibly difficult for a teen parent to support a family. We all know that. And it is unfortunately often seen as even a failure, because, a lot of teen parents don't make it too far economically because they're so preoccupied just trying to survive. This is not to knock them. This is just a reality to explain why there is socioeconomic differences between racial groups. And I think that's a very overlooked factor of teen pregnancy rate between the racial groups, a severely one, because that ties into the single mother home, the fatherless home, which has, been the hot topic of black politics, of a big explanation of the high crime rates as well, which of course directly ties into BLM and defunding to police and things like that. So that's another topic too I'll talk about later. So you have this big picture of, it's not systemic racism or oppression anymore, which is keeping this one group back and another group forward, or propelling another group forward. A lot of it is cultural values and choices of the individual. We talked about study habits. We talked about teen pregnancy rates and family planning. We talked about income spending. That's way too many large factors to ignore, and to just shove them all aside and just say this clouded oppressive system just keeps them back is entirely simplistic, way oversimplified, and ignores things that actually matter and that can actually be improved within the Black or Latino community to help them catch up in socioeconomic status. And I'll just relate to this personally now. I had the privilege of going to a high school in Palo Alto, which had both students from West Palo Alto and East Palo Alto in the 90s. Now, West Palo Alto, of course, is very famous for Stanford and the very well-educated population there, and the children of those well-educated population. And East Palo Alto, all right, 1995. East Palo Alto was the murder capital of the United States. It had the highest murder per capita rate in the entire country. All right, side by side with one of the most educated, high-tech towns. They were only divided by an overpass. That's all it took. And I was part of a music exchange program, so I bounced back and forth, and I had friends in both of these communities. For the most part, they self-segregated. West Palo Alto kids hung out with the West Palo Alto kids, and East Palo Alto kids hung out with East Palo Alto kids. And the West Palo Alto kids were very, involved in academia, in STEM, and the East Palo Alto kids were, kind of kind of just troublemakers for the most part, or had a lot on their plate from their peer troublemakers, even if they're good kids. And I hung out with both because I was involved in academia and as well as sports. So I was part of wrestling as one of the I was varsity wrestling, and so I had Black and Latino friends there from East Palo Alto. I got to see firsthand how cultural norms and personal choices greatly affected a person's outcome in life. And on one hand, I had my white and Asian friends in the West Palo Alto side, and one of my most successful friends didn't even have parents here. He he only had himself. He lived by himself. His mom worked abroad to just help pay his rent, but he was definitely not an overly privileged individual. He became the most successful guy I've ever known. He became a multimillionaire by age 25. He was the youngest computer science professor in Carnegie Mellon. He sold his company to Disney when he was 25 for 700 mil. I don't know how much he got out of it, but it had to be as something of that. And he worked really hard, and he was definitely an anomaly. He was probably borderline genius, but his work habits was really what allowed him to do that. Same thing with all my other West Palo Alto friends, whether white or Asian. And then what were my East Palo Alto friends doing? They were gang banging. They were doing drugs. They were having a lot of sex. My West Palo Alto friends, some of them are still virgins today in their 30s. All right, kind of like the Isaac Newtons. But these are all choices, and for affirmative action to say that it's just because of the system, and to take away the hard-earned resources of someone who committed their life to academia or having a good career or starting a startup, from a startup business to being sold an IPO. That's incredibly disingenuous, immoral, unethical, unconstitutional, definitely unconstitutional, and greatly takes away from the real issues. The real issues that can be changed for the most part internally without taking away from another group that had nothing to do with past oppression of that group. So, we all need to denounce affirmative action, especially in states or groups where it's clear that it hurts one minority that had nothing to do with the systemic racism or oppression of the past and propels another one forward. That doesn't mean that we can't help the populations that aren't doing as well. It just means that we can't discriminate. We can't play favorites. We can't have double standards when it comes to things like this. When it comes to social reform and to social safety nets, it's entirely unfair and not effective. So, for example, let's talk about the UCs again, right? The tuition cost of the UCs has quadrupled in the last 20 years. When I went to college, it was I think it was like $5,000 a year. I went to UCSD, and I think it's somewhere 15 to 20,000 now. Why did this happen? Well, it's not because they got better education. You can look this up. The education costs flatline. The pay that the tuition went towards professors has remained the same. The difference has gone to administrators. And who are these administrators? They're mostly administrators for political causes. They're for advocacy groups like third wave feminism or racial politics or LGBTQ politics. So by not really addressing the real issues and trying to patch it with some oversimplified systemic model, they've actually made things worse, not just for everybody, but especially for the underprivileged groups, which they were trying to help in the first place. Very, very disingenuous. Anyway, I'll wrap it up there with this video. A lot of these topics can expand upon, but I hope this paints a clear picture of why the Asians have largely succeeded, and it is not because we were given handouts. Thank you.